Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishna Vav, Mishna 6. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shlomis Bas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Oideu Hasal al Kasefai. Now, actually, you got to give a little introduction to today's Mishnah. As we mentioned, a person brings Bikurim, does what's called Mikra Bikurim. He reads passages from the Torah. The Torah says these verses should be recited when you bring your Bikurim. Now, because of the discussion of the Mishnah, we need to go through what the Torah says. So this is in Devarim 26:3 Chavav Pasuk Gimel. A person brings his Bikurim, and the Torah says, "If Amarta Elav, you shall say to him, referring to God, Higadati Hayom Hashem Elokecha, I declare today to Hashem your God, Kivasi Elo Aretz, that I have come to the land, Asher Nishba Hashem Lavo Yiseinu Laseislanu, that Hashem has sworn to our forefathers to give to us." This is what the person bringing the Bikurim says to the Kohen. He says this verse. That's Pasuk Gimel, verse 3. Verse 4 reads, "V'lakach hakoyin hatena miyodecha." The Kohen will take the basket from your hand, and place it before the altar of Hashem your God. That's 4. 5, Pasuk Hey reads, "You shall speak before Hashem your God and say," referring to the person who brought the Bikurim, you will say, "Arami Ovid Avi," an Aramean, referring to Lavan, Yaakov's father-in-law, tried to destroy my father. Arami Ovid Avi, the person from Aram wanted to destroy my father, referring to Lavan, the uncle and father-in-law of Yaakov, and he wanted to destroy Yaakov. Okay, that is Pasuk Hey, verse 5. And then from 5 to 10, there is a continuation of what the person says. They're talking about going into Egypt, being enslaved, being freed. And then Pasuk Yud, verse 10, is Va'ata hine hevesi es reishis pri adama shenasat li Hashem. And now, behold, I have brought the first of the fruits of the land that you have given me, Hashem. V'hinachnu lefnei Hashem Elokecha. You shall place it down before Hashem, your God. Shtachavisa Hashem lefnei Hashem Elokecha. You shall bow before Hashem, your God. So the way the verses are laid out is a person comes to the Azara, to the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. There's a Kohen there. And he says to the Kohen, "I declare today before Hashem, your God, that I have come to the land." That's one statement that he makes. The Torah says, at that point, he stops. The Kohen takes the basket and puts it in front of Hashem, whatever that means. And then again, it says, "Vanisav Amarta, you shall declare and say," you shall raise your voice and say, another few verses of what the man says, and concludes with the words, "And now, behold, I have brought the first of the fruits of the earth that you have given me, Hashem." That's the end of what he says. That's the end of his recital. Then it says he puts it down in front of Hashem, your God, and bows. So, from the way the verses are laid out, it would seem like he says something. He stops. The Kohen takes the basket, puts it down in front of the altar. That's what it means. And then again, the person continues with the rest of his recital until at the end, again, it says he finishes, and he places it before Hashem. So the way the layout of the Torah is, it sounds like he said the person bringing the Bikurim makes one statement, stops, and then after the stop and the Kohen taking the basket, he continues until he finishes. That's what it sounds like. But that's going to be the discussion of the Mishnah. What exactly does happen? While the basket is still on his shoulder, he reads, he starts from the words, "I declare today before Hashem your God," until he finishes the entire portion. Meaning, according to this opinion, this first opinion of the Mishnah, although there's an interruption, where the way the Torah lays it out, there's an interruption in between what he says, the Tanakhama says that in actuality there's no interruption. He starts from Higadati and goes straight until he finishes all the way at the end, where he says, "Behold, I have brought." That's what he does. Now, what is that pasuk? What is that verse in the middle referring to, according to this opinion? So the answer is, even though it's interrupting, even though the way the Torah lays it out, it interrupts what he says. Practically speaking, he does not interrupt. He says the whole thing. And when the Torah says, and the Kohen will take it and place it, it really means after he finishes saying it. After he finishes saying everything, the Kohen puts it down. Now, if you recall, when the person finishes saying everything, again it says, and he places it. So according to this opinion, it's the same thing that we mentioned before. The same way it says before, the Kohen will take it and place it. That's being repeated here. Why is it being repeated? Commentaries say it's being repeated in order to point out that this is a very important part of Bikurim. You have to place it down in front of the altar so that you can have so that the mitzvah is done. That is how the first opinion of Tanna Kama learns all the verses and what happens. Okay, that's the first opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. Ararami Oived Avi. He begins with the pasuk, he got it Hayoim. He begins with the verse, behold, I declare, and finishes that verse and stops before he begins Arami Oived Avi. He stops. Now, he Gil Arami Oived Avi, as he reaches that part of that verse of what he recites, where it says the man from the Aramean want to destroy my father. At that point, he lowers the basket from his shoulder, and it grabs it by its rim. And then the Kohen puts his hands under the basket, meaning the owner is holding the basket by the rim. The Kohen puts his hands under the basket, and he, the Kohen, waves the basket together with the owner. Waving, as we've had before, means they wave it in all four directions and up and down, as we do the lulav on Sukkot. So what's happening here, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is when the verse interrupts, it's a real interruption. The person who brings the Bikurim says the first verse, then he stops. Doesn't do it, he stops. Now it says the Kohen takes the basket from his hand and places it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't mean that he takes it away from the person and he places it down in front of God, actually, meaning in front of the altar. It means that he puts his hands under the basket, and not that he places it down, but that he waves it together with the person who's holding it at the top. That is how Rabbi Yehuda says we have to interpret that verse. Then the Kari Me'arami Amidavi Achugamakala Parsha. Then he continues and he reads from the Aramean want to destroy my father until he finishes the entire portion. Okay, now finishes all the verses of the recital. He finishes. He says that he finishes it then. Then it says Umanichoi Betzara Mizbeach, and then he puts it down next to the altar. He puts it down. That means not that the Kohen puts it down. He, the owner of the Bikurim, then puts it down at the side of the altar. Not the Kohen, he does it, because the only thing the Kohen does, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is place his hands under the basket and wave it with him. He actually puts it down at the side of the altar. Vishtachava, he bows down, which is the Torah says that, and bowing down in this case means that he prostrates himself by lying on the ground facing He's lying on the ground, facing the Heichel, facing the sanctuary, the building of the Beis Hamikdash, with his arms and legs stretched out. He's basically on his face, flat hands and legs stretched out, facing towards the Heichel, facing towards the actual building of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, that's how he bows down. V'yatza, and he goes out and he leaves. After this is done, he leaves. Doesn't stick around anymore. The commentaries say when he leaves with his face toward the Heichel, he walks out backward, that's showing his respect for the Heichel. Meaning he doesn't just turn around and leave. He actually walks backwards. Doesn't turn his back on the building of the Beis Hamikdash out of respect, but he's facing it and he walks out backwards until he leaves the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, So basically, what we have here in the Mishnah is that we have two different opinions about how to read the verses. According to the Tanna Kama, the person who does the Mikra Bikurim, does the recital of these verses, does all the verses at one time. And when the Torah says the Kohen puts it down, or when it says later on and he puts it down, it's going on the Kohen. And according to the Tanna Kama, there's no waving anywhere. There's no mention of waving. There's no tenufa. There's no waving of the basket done at all. And then it's after the person finishes saying everything that he says, the Kohen takes the basket and he puts it down. And yes, according to the Tanna Kama, the person then bows down and leaves. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the person bringing Bikurim says one verse. He then lowers the basket from his shoulder, holding onto it by the rim. The Kohen puts his hands under the basket. Together they wave it in fourfold directions and up and down. After that, the person continues holding onto the basket and finishes all the rest of the recital that he has to make. After that is done, he takes the basket and puts it in front of next to the altar, and he bows down and he leaves. Okay, we continue with the laws of Rechilas from the Chavetz Chaim, and we are in Klal Test chapter 9. And now the Chavetz Chaim is going to go into another illustration about, again, what a person has to deal with when he does want to tell a person regarding another person. We had before about the people going into partnership. You knew about one of the partners isn't the good person to go into partnership with. So you're telling one of them about the other. In essence, if it gets back to the person that you spoke not positively about, I shouldn't say that. You're actually, in this case, when you are warning someone about someone else, that's Lashon Harah. Again, it's in the section of Rechilas of the Chavetz Chaim, and that's really Lashon Harah. And the question is, when can you say it? When can you not? Now, the new case is like this. If you see someone wants to make a shidduch, meaning he wants to have, let's say, his daughter marry someone's son. So this person is looking into it. And you, the third party observer, you know that the chassan, meaning in this, just for example, that the groom or the young man involved in this question of marriage has some very serious problems, has some very serious faults, has some very serious shortcomings. He has some very serious issues that he lacks in. What examples of that are they? We'll see later on. What would be considered a chasar? What would be considered a serious lacking that you'd be able to tell somebody about it? But that's the case. You know that the young man who is being, who this match is being proposed to, has some very serious issues. And the other side, meaning the father of the young woman, he has no idea about this. And were he to know about it, let's say, he would never go into it. You should reveal to him these issues, these problems that the young man has. There are many conditions that have to be met, as will be explained further on. One has to focus well, one has to concentrate well and contemplate well all those conditions before he allows himself to do this. And don't from one kind of case, or from one kind of situation, one kind of case, make comparisons to another. Every case has to be judged on its own. And And before we go into explaining this law in all its details, Chavetz Chaim first says we need to kind of talk about the problems, the obvious issue, the obvious problems that are common when it comes to these kinds of situations. Although what I will be talking about are elementary. You don't need any Talmudic sources. You don't need any deep logical arguments or explanations for it. But due to the terrible damage that can be brought upon a person when it comes to these kinds of things, and people are very lax and think there's no problem saying anything they want to say. Therefore, I am forced to have to elaborate on the wrongdoings of these people who speak too loosely. Perhaps through my efforts, Hashem will grant to remove at some level the terrible blindness that people have when it comes to these issues, and are very quick and lax to speak badly about people without the right to do so. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.